$500,000 had already disappeared into diagnostics, and the car still wouldn't start. For 9 straight days, the black Bugatti sat inside, Bay 3 of Sterling Prestige Motors like a silent weapon no one could understand. Mechanics walked around it carefully. Engineers argued over laptops. Specialists flew in from different countries, charging more money per day than most people made in months, and none of them could make the engine come alive. Vanessa Sterling stood on the glass balcony above the service floor with her arms folded tightly across her chest, staring down at the machine that had slowly become the most frustrating thing in her entire life. The Bugatti Chiron wasn't just another car to her. It was the only thing she had ever bought without logic. No investment strategy, no branding advantage, no business calculation, just desire. 3 years earlier, she had seen it at a private auction in Monaco under white showroom lights, and for the first time in years, she made a decision without thinking through consequences. She simply wanted it, and now it sat downstairs like $4 million of humiliation. Cold, silent, dead. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Marcus stepped into the office carrying a tablet against his chest. His expression already told her this wasn't good news. "They want another authorization," he said carefully. Vanessa didn't look away from the window. "How much this time?" Marcus hesitated. 82,000. That finally made her turn. For what? They believe the issue might be tied to the secondary ECU system now. Kane's team wants to replace the entire unit. Vanessa stared at him for a few seconds without speaking. Then she laughed once. Not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. 9 days, she said quietly. 9 days, Marcus. I know. $500,000 spent on experts, and they still don't know what's wrong with the car. Marcus stayed silent. He had worked with Vanessa long enough to know she became calmer when she was angrier. The dangerous moments were never loud. "They're guessing now," she said. Marcus didn't answer because both of them already knew it was true. Vanessa walked back toward her desk, slowly, and pressed her fingers against the edge of the glass surface. "Send Kane upstairs." "Ma." Victor Kane arrived 18 minutes later wearing a dark, tailored coat and the kind of confidence expensive specialists carried naturally. He was famous in automotive circles. Former Formula One consultant, certified hypercar diagnostician, the kind of man clients bragged about hiring, and at that moment, Vanessa was starting to hate him. "Miss Sterling," he said smoothly as he entered. "Sit." He sat. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. "Explain to me why my car still doesn't run." Kane immediately launched into technical language. Firmware instability, electrical synchronization failure, thermal ignition interference. Complex explanations layered over other complex explanations. And Vanessa listened carefully. But because she was trying to figure out, was talking about, the office became quiet. "Do you actually know what's wrong with the car?" Just for a second. That tiny hesitation changed everything. "That wasn't my question." Then finally, "Not yet." Oddly enough, honesty irritated her less than fake confidence. Kane exhaled softly. Vanessa almost smiled again. "Unbelievable." "With respect, Miss Sterling, vehicles at this level are extremely complex. And when my executives don't know something, they stop pretending." For the first time since entering the office, Victor Kane looked uncomfortable. "Authorize the ECU replacement," she said finally. She let the sentence hang unfinished. Kane understood perfectly. That evening, long after most employees had gone home, the city lights outside reflected across the polished windows while cold. Bay 3 glowed under white overhead lighting. The Bugatti, still beautiful, and ran her fingers across the surface felt cold beneath her hand. That was her real talent. Not public speaking, problem solving. Where broken things stayed, she remembered winters when and her mother came home exhausted. Back then, success meant control, and safety meant never feeling helpless again. Helpless. She turned. "Sorry," he said quickly. "You're fine," Vanessa replied. "Danny?" He looked toward the Bugatti carefully. Vanessa folded her arms. Danny blinked. Surprised she was asking him? "Yes. I think the problem's smaller than they're looking for." Meaning? Not because she trusted him anymore. Whether he actually knew what After nearly 10 minutes, he finally stopped. Then Vanessa asked one simple question. Kane paused, but she caught it. "We have several strong possibilities," he replied carefully. Another pause. "No," he admitted quietly. Vanessa slowly nodded once. "How much have I paid your team so far?" $491,000. Almost. Kane leaned forward slightly. So are billion-dollar companies, she interrupted. The room went still. Vanessa stood. But if this car still doesn't start tomorrow, she didn't need to complete it. Vanessa walked alone through the quiet service floor. March air pressed against the building, and there it was, still silent. She walked closer slowly, smooth black carbon fiber near the rear panel. Vanessa had spent most of her life solving problems, not networking, not investor meetings. She grew up in a tiny apartment in Aurora, broken because nobody had money to fix them. Heating barely worked from double shifts. Control meant safety, but standing beside this dead car, she felt exactly that. Footsteps echoed behind her. Danny Cho stood near the entrance, holding his backpack awkwardly. "I didn't know you were still here," was one of the younger technicians. Quiet, smart, observant. They still haven't figured it out? What do you think? Honestly? He walked closer slowly. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. Kane's team keeps searching for catastrophic failures, big system problems, but everything important checks out during diagnostics. He looked toward the rear of the car. "I think it's something tiny." Vanessa studied him carefully. Danny continued carefully, almost nervous now. "A few years ago, I worked on an old Mustang with an ignition issue nobody could solve. Turned out to be a corroded grounding wire smaller than my finger." Vanessa stayed silent. "Kane said hypercars don't work like vintage Mustangs," Danny added quickly. "He's not wrong," she replied. "No," Danny admitted, "but electrical systems are still electrical systems." Vanessa glanced back toward the Bugatti. For some reason, Danny's answer felt more honest than anything she'd heard all week. "Go home," she told him quietly. Danny nodded and headed toward the exit. But before leaving, he stopped. "I think Kane's brilliant," he said carefully. "I just think he's looking at the wrong problem." Then he disappeared down the hallway. Vanessa stood alone again beside the silent Bugatti. And for the first time in 9 days, she started wondering if the experts were completely lost. The next morning started badly. Not dramatically, just badly in the slow, irritating way problems continue after you've already spent too much money trying to solve them. By 7:40 a.m., Vanessa was already in her office reviewing contracts while cold gray clouds hung over Denver like wet concrete. At 7:52, her desk phone rang. "Miss Sterling," the receptionist said nervously, "there's kind of a situation downstairs." Vanessa closed her laptop. "What kind of situation?" "There's a delivery driver arguing with Mr. Kane." That made her pause. "Why?" "He says he knows what's wrong with the Bugatti." Silence. Then, "I'll be down in 2 minutes." She heard Victor Kane before she even reached the service floor. "You are completely unqualified to make that assumption." His voice echoed through the building. Vanessa pushed through the doors and immediately saw the scene. Several technicians stood nearby, pretending not to stare. Victor Kane was standing near Bay 3 looking furious, and directly across from him stood a man Vanessa had never seen before. Early 30s, lean build, dark hair slightly too long, faded olive work jacket, old work boots, no expensive tools, no polished image, no performance, just a guy holding a delivery manifest beside a beat-up blue Chevy pickup parked near the wrong loading dock. But what caught Vanessa's attention wasn't his appearance. It was his focus. While Kane argued loudly, the stranger barely looked at him. His eyes stayed fixed on the Bugatti, specifically the rear section near the exhaust housing, like he was already solving something in his head. You can't walk into a professional diagnostic environment and start inventing theories. Kane snapped. The man finally answered calmly, "I'm not inventing anything. You have absolutely no understanding of the systems involved in this vehicle." The stranger looked at him evenly. "I understand them better than you think." That made the room quieter. Vanessa stepped forward. "Who are you?" The man turned toward her. His eyes were sharp but calm. Not intimidated, not arrogant, just direct. "Caleb Hayes," he said. "I own a repair shop in Evergreen. I was supposed to deliver parts to your Commerce location." He glanced toward the truck. "Wrong address." Vanessa folded her arms. "And somehow that led to this?" One of the younger techs cleared his throat. Danny mentioned the Bugatti had been down for 9 days, he explained carefully. Then Mr. Hayes asked what production year it was. Caleb nodded slightly. 2021? Vanessa stared at him. "Yes. Q2 production?" Now even Kane looked surprised. "How would you know that?" Vanessa asked. Caleb looked back toward the car. "Because I know a specific issue that affected part of that production run." Victor Kane immediately scoffed. Oh, this should be good. But Caleb ignored him. There's a secondary grounding configuration hidden behind the battery module on certain Q2 2021 builds, he explained calmly. It was added late during electrical revisions. Vanessa narrowed her eyes. Kane crossed his arms. That information does not exist in official service documentation. That's because the update never made it into the public manuals before release, Caleb replied. The room went silent. Even Kane stopped talking. Caleb continued. In colder climates, corrosion can develop on the secondary ground terminal. The primary system still passes diagnostics, so everything looks normal. He pointed toward the rear frame area. But when the temperature drops, the metal contracts just enough to interrupt continuity during ignition sequencing. Danny stared at him. Vanessa slowly stepped closer. And that stops the engine from starting? Caleb nodded once. The ignition command begins normally, but the return ground fails before completion. Kane laughed sharply. That's an incredibly specific theory. It's not a theory. Kane's face tightened. And where exactly did you learn this information? For the first time, Caleb looked directly at him. I helped design it. Complete silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Danny blinked. Wait, what? Caleb slipped the folded delivery paper into his jacket pocket. I worked in hypercar electrical, systems engineering. For 6 years, he said simply. I was part of the team that handled ignition modifications on several limited production vehicles. Kane stared at him. Vanessa studied him carefully now. The worn jacket, the old truck, the calm confidence. None of it matched the image she expected from someone with that background. You worked on the Chiron platform? She asked. Partially. And now you own a repair shop? Caleb shrugged lightly. My daughter needed stability more than I needed Europe. The answer was so matter-of-fact it almost caught her off guard. No self-pity, no dramatic explanation, just truth. Vanessa looked back at the Bugatti, then at Kane, then back at Caleb. Can you prove it? Caleb nodded toward the car. Give me 10 minutes. Kane immediately stepped forward. Miss Sterling, I strongly advise against allowing some random mechanic to start tearing into... Random mechanics don't casually reference undocumented production revisions. Vanessa interrupted. Kane stopped talking. That irritated him even more. Vanessa looked at Caleb. What do you need? Flashlight, multimeter, basic socket set. Danny immediately moved to grab them. The entire service floor became strangely quiet while Caleb worked. No speeches, no dramatic explanations, no performance. He simply knelt beside the Bugatti and slid underneath. The rear section with the flashlight. Vanessa watched carefully from a few feet away. After nearly 30 seconds, Caleb spoke calmly from beneath the car. Found it. Danny crouched nearby. There's a panel here, 8mm socket. Danny handed it down. A few moments later, Caleb removed a small hidden carbon fiber cover. Then he reached deeper inside with the flashlight. Another few seconds passed. Then, there you are. He connected the multimeter, checked the reading once, then again. Finally, he slid back out from underneath the car and stood up slowly. Without saying anything, he turned the multimeter screen toward Vanessa. Even with limited electrical knowledge, she immediately understood the number was wrong. Very wrong. The resistance is too high, Caleb explained quietly. The ground continuity is breaking. Danny leaned closer. So the terminal's damaged? Micro-corrosion, Caleb replied. Probably worsened by temperature changes. Kane remained completely silent now. And somehow that silence was louder than all his arguing earlier. Caleb stood and brushed dust from his jacket. Got contact cleaner? Danny nodded quickly. Yeah, and a wire brush. 2 minutes later, Caleb carefully cleaned the terminal connection. No rushing, no drama. Just steady hands and quiet concentration. Then he checked the multimeter again. This time the reading stabilized perfectly. Caleb reassembled the panel calmly and stepped back. That should do it. Vanessa stared at him. That's it? For now, he corrected. The terminal itself still needs replacement eventually, but this should restore proper continuity. Vanessa looked toward the Bugatti, then toward Danny. Start it. Danny moved quickly into the driver's seat. Everyone on the floor watched silently. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the engine exploded to life. The sound hit the entire building like controlled violence. Deep, heavy, powerful enough to vibrate through concrete floors. Several employees actually jumped. Danny looked stunned behind the wheel. The Bugatti idled perfectly. After 9 days of silence, it was alive again. Nobody spoke. Not immediately. The engine noise filled the room, while every technician stared at her. Caleb Hayes standing quietly beside. the car with grease on his hands, and an old work jacket zipped halfway to his throat. $500,000 in specialists, 9 days of diagnostics, and the solution had been hiding behind a tiny panel nobody even knew existed. Vanessa slowly looked toward Victor Kane. His face had gone completely pale, and for the first time since meeting him, he looked unsure of himself. The Bugatti continued rumbling inside, Bay 3 like an animal finally released from a cage. Nobody on the service floor seemed to know what to say. Technicians exchanged stunned looks. Danny looked like he was trying not to grin too obviously. And Victor Kane stood completely frozen beside the diagnostic station, staring at the running engine like it had personally betrayed him. Caleb, meanwhile, looked almost unaffected, like fixing million-dollar hypercars between deliveries was somehow normal. Vanessa watched him carefully. That calmness interested her more than the repair itself. Most people would have enjoyed the moment, would have taken satisfaction in proving everyone wrong. Caleb didn't. He simply picked up the dirty rag Danny handed him and wiped his hands quietly. The repair's temporary, he reminded them again. The terminal assembly still needs replacement. Nobody answered immediately. Finally, Danny broke the silence. So, that's seriously all it was? Caleb nodded. Tiny failure. Big consequences. Danny shook his head slowly, almost laughing. 9 days. Caleb glanced toward him. That happens more than people think. Victor Kane finally stepped forward again. His voice sounded tighter now. You're telling me the entire ignition failure came from a secondary grounding interruption? Yes. And Bugatti failed to document this publicly? It wasn't intentional, Caleb replied calmly. The modification happened late during production adjustments. Internal engineering notes existed, but not all service centers received updated documentation immediately. Kane stared at him carefully now, not dismissing him anymore, trying to understand him. You really worked on the platform? Partially. What division? Electrical systems integration. Kane's expression shifted slightly. That answer meant something to him, something legitimate, because suddenly the skepticism disappeared from his face. Vanessa noticed it immediately. Experts recognized other experts, and Victor Kane had just realized Caleb wasn't bluffing. One of Kane's technicians stepped closer nervously. If you knew about this issue, why leave engineering? Caleb looked toward the Bugatti for a second before answering. My wife passed away. The room quieted again. My daughter was too, he continued simply. The job required living in Europe most of the year. He shrugged once. She needed a father more than Bugatti needed another engineer. No dramatic emotion, no sadness performed for sympathy, just truth spoken plainly, and somehow that made it hit harder. Vanessa felt something shift quietly inside her chest, because she knew people like Caleb rarely explained themselves unless absolutely necessary. Marcus approached carefully from behind Vanessa. Should I still process Kane's replacement authorization? Vanessa didn't take her eyes off Caleb. No. Kane looked exhausted suddenly, like the last 9 days had finally landed on his shoulders all at once. To his credit, though, he didn't argue. He slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes once, then looked toward Caleb. I would never have found that. The honesty surprised everyone, especially Vanessa. Caleb answered without arrogance. You couldn't diagnose something you didn't know existed. Kane nodded slowly. That's fair. Vanessa folded her arms and looked between both men. The contrast was impossible to ignore now. One man had arrived with certifications, teams, presentations, and 6-figure invoices. The other arrived accidentally in a pickup truck and fixed the problem in under 15 minutes. Vanessa hated how much that bothered her. Not because Caleb embarrassed Kane, because it exposed something uncomfortable about herself. She had trusted appearance, credentials, presentation, reputation, and she had completely overlooked the possibility that real expertise might walk into the building wearing old work boots. About 20 minutes later, the crowd finally started breaking apart. Technicians returned to work. The service floor slowly resumed normal movement, but Vanessa noticed Danny still watching. Caleb carefully while he packed away the tools. Like a student watching a teacher, Caleb slid the multimeter back into the toolbox. Appreciate the help, he told Danny. Danny shook his head quickly. No, seriously. That was insane. A tiny smile appeared at the corner of Caleb's mouth. It was corrosion. Yeah, but you knew exactly where to look. Caleb closed the toolbox. That's usually the difference. Danny looked like he wanted to ask another 100 questions. Vanessa understood the feeling. She walked toward Caleb slowly. You were leaving? He nodded toward the loading dock. I still have parts sitting in the truck. You drove here by mistake. Looks that way. And somehow fixed my car. That part wasn't intentional. For the first time, Vanessa almost smiled. Almost. She studied him more carefully now. The worn jacket, the rough hands, the small grease stains near his sleeve. Nothing about him looked polished, but everything about him felt real. "What's the name of your shop?" she asked. "Hayes Auto." "In Evergreen?" "Yeah." "How many employees?" "2 full-time. 1 kid part-time after school." Vanessa blinked. "That's it?" "That's enough." Again, the answer was simple, direct. No unnecessary words. She found herself oddly drawn to that. Most people around her constantly tried to impress her. Caleb didn't seem interested in impressing anyone. "You mentioned your daughter," Vanessa said carefully. Caleb nodded. "Lily, how old?" 8. Something changed in his face when he said it. Very slight, but visible. A softness that hadn't been there before. Vanessa noticed immediately. "She likes whales," he added unexpectedly. "What?" "She changes career plans every month, but right now, she wants to become a marine biologist." That finally made Vanessa smile properly. A specific field. She's very committed. He rested one arm lightly against the truck bed. Last month it was race car driving. Before that, she wanted to build submarines. And now whales? Apparently whales are the future. Vanessa laughed quietly before she could stop herself. The sound surprised both of them slightly, because it felt normal, not strategic, not calculated, just genuine. Caleb looked at her for a second longer than before, then glanced back toward the Bugatti through the service doors. "You should drive it tonight." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "In this weather?" "It's 45 degrees. You'll survive." She folded her arms. "You sound very confident." "I fixed it." That almost made her laugh again. Almost. Then Caleb reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "The replacement part number." He handed it to her. "You'll need the updated terminal assembly eventually. Bugatti's Los Angeles Center might have one in stock." Vanessa looked down at the number, then back at him. "You're helping me save money after I just watched people bill me $500,000. Caleb shrugged lightly. "You don't need to spend more than necessary." Simple again. Always simple. Vanessa looked at him for another moment, then made a decision. "I want to hire you." That caught him slightly off guard. "For what?" "When the replacement part arrives, I want you involved in the installation." "You already have technicians." "I want the person who actually understands the system." Caleb considered that quietly. "I run a shop," he said. "I can't disappear for weeks." "It won't take weeks." Still he hesitated. Not because he wanted more money, because he was genuinely thinking about schedules, responsibilities, customers. Again, real. "What's your rate?" Vanessa asked. A faint, amused expression crossed his face. "You probably don't want to ask hypercar engineers that question." "Try me. 220 an hour." Vanessa stared at him. That was shockingly reasonable, especially compared to Victor Kane's numbers. "Done." Caleb blinked once. "You didn't negotiate. You already saved me hundreds of thousands." That finally earned a small, real smile from him. Not big, not dramatic, but real enough to change his whole face for half a second. And Vanessa unexpectedly noticed something dangerous. She wanted to see that expression again. Caleb extended his hand. She shook it. His grip felt rough and warm from work. Nothing corporate about it. Nothing artificial. Just solid. "I'll send the paperwork this afternoon," she said. "All right." He opened the truck door, then paused. "The car matters to you more than you admit." Vanessa looked at him carefully. "What makes you say that?" "You were standing beside it alone last night." She felt her stomach tighten slightly. "How do you know that?" "I came back from my delivery paperwork around 8. He leaned one arm against the open truck door. "You weren't looking at it like an expensive object." His eyes met hers calmly. "You were looking at it like something personal." For a moment, Vanessa didn't know what to say, because the uncomfortable part was, he was right. Caleb gave a small nod toward her. "Drive it tonight," he repeated. Then he climbed into the old blue Chevy and pulled slowly out of the loading area. Vanessa stood there watching the truck disappear into traffic, while the Bugatti continued rumbling, alive behind her. And for reasons she didn't fully understand yet, the building suddenly felt quieter after he left. Vanessa drove the Bugatti that night, at first only because Caleb told her to, which irritated her more than she wanted to admit. She took I-25 south just after sunset while Denver disappeared behind her in fading orange light. The city slowly thinned into long stretches of highway bordered by cold open land and distant mountain shadows. The Bugatti felt different now, alive again. Every shift smooth, every acceleration immediate, the engine responding like something breathing beneath her hands. At one point she pushed it past 110. Not recklessly, just enough to feel the machine fully wake up. And somewhere during that drive, she realized something uncomfortable. For the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about work. No board meetings, no acquisition calls, no investor pressure. Just the road, the engine, and a mechanic from Evergreen with grease on his hands and a voice too, calm to forget easily. 3 days later, she called his shop, not because she needed to. She created a reason first. Something about cold weather electrical cycling and grounding stability. Technically valid questions, but still excuses. The phone rang twice. Then, Hayes Auto. His voice sounded exactly the same over the phone. Steady, quiet, slightly rough. It's Vanessa. A small pause. Hey, no performance there either. Not Miss Sterling. Not formal professionalism. Just hey. Strangely, she liked that. I wanted to ask something about the replacement terminal, she said. Already aware she sounded less convincing than usual. Okay, if temperatures keep dropping below freezing, should I reduce cold starts until the new assembly arrives? A brief silence followed, and Vanessa suddenly had the strange feeling. Caleb knew perfectly well this wasn't entirely about the car. Garage kept? He asked. Yes. Then you're probably fine. Just let the electrical system cycle before pushing the engine hard. She leaned back in her office chair. That's it? That's it. Another silence settled between them. Not awkward, just present. In the background, she heard tools clinking somewhere inside the shop. Then a younger voice yelling something unintelligible. Then Caleb replying, "Torquey wrench, top drawer." The voice disappeared. Vanessa found herself smiling slightly without meaning to. Busy day? She asked. Transmission rebuild. Customer watched 3 YouTube tutorials and declared himself a mechanic. That usually ends well. It did not. She laughed quietly. Again, that strange feeling returned. Normal. Conversation with Caleb felt normal in a way almost nothing else in her life did anymore. Most conversations she had were transactional, strategic, measured. Even friendly people wanted something eventually. But Caleb spoke like someone who genuinely had no interest in performing. You always this calm? She asked suddenly. A short pause. No. What changed? This time the silence lasted longer. When Lily was born, he answered finally. You stop wasting energy on unnecessary noise after certain things happen. Vanessa looked out across her office windows toward downtown Denver. The city looked cold and gray beneath low clouds. And losing your wife? She asked quietly before she could stop herself. Another silence. She immediately regretted asking, but Caleb answered anyway. Yeah, he said simply. That too. No drama. No emotional speech. Just truth again. And somehow that hit harder than any sad story would have. Vanessa softened her voice slightly. You don't have to talk about it. I know. But she noticed something important. He hadn't sounded angry, she asked. Just careful. Very careful. A loud metallic crash sounded somewhere in the background. Then the younger voice again. That definitely wasn't supposed to happen. Vanessa heard Caleb exhale slowly. You still alive? I think so. Then we're fine. Vanessa laughed again before covering her mouth slightly. You run a very professional operation. Standards are flexible. Another tiny smile pulled at her mouth. Then Caleb spoke again. What are you doing Saturday morning? The question caught her completely off guard. What? There's a diner in Evergreen. She blinked once. Okay. This suddenly felt different. All right. My daughter likes their breakfast burritos enough to defend them publicly. Vanessa leaned back slowly in her chair. And this information is relevant because she asked if the Bugatti lady was real. That actually made her laugh. The Bugatti lady? You made an impression. She could hear the faint amusement in his voice now. Very small. But there. And your daughter approved of me? She asked 17 questions about you. That seems concerning. It's actually lower than average. Vanessa stared out her office windows again. A dangerous warmth was slowly beginning to settle somewhere inside her chest. When? She asked quietly. Saturday, around 8:30. She should have said no. Normally she would have. Vanessa Sterling did not drive into Mountain. Towns to have breakfast with. Mechanics and their children. Her life didn't work like that. Her calendar barely had room for sleep most weeks. But before logic could catch up, she heard herself answer. Okay. A small silence followed. Then, all right, Caleb said softly. And for reasons she couldn't fully explain, that single word stayed with her long after the call ended. Saturday arrived colder than expected. Thin clouds hung low across the mountains while Evergreen disappeared beneath pale morning fog. Vanessa almost turned around twice during the drive. Not because she didn't want to go, because she did, and that made her nervous, which annoyed her. The diner sat beside the highway with warm yellow windows glowing against the cold morning. Above the entrance hung a large, hand-painted elk sign faded slightly from weather and time. Exactly the kind of place Vanessa normally drove past without noticing. The parking lot held 6 cars, including Caleb's old blue Chevy. For some reason, seeing the truck there made her heartbeat quicken slightly. Ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. She sat inside her Bugatti for a few extra seconds staring at the diner entrance, then finally stepped out into the cold. Inside smelled like coffee, fried potatoes, and green chili. Warm. Lived in. Real. Caleb sat in a corner booth wearing a dark flannel jacket, coffee mug in one hand. Across from him sat a small girl coloring aggressively on a paper placemat with blue markers scattered around her elbows. Lily noticed Vanessa immediately. Her eyes widened. Then she looked directly at her father. She's actually real. Caleb rubbed one hand across his forehead slowly. Good morning to you too. Vanessa laughed before she could help it. Lily stared openly at her. You really own a Bugatti? I do. The black one? Yes. How fast have you gone? Caleb sighed softly. Lily, what? It's an important question. Vanessa slid into the booth, smiling slightly. About 180. Lily's mouth dropped open. That's faster than roller coasters. Considerably. Lily looked genuinely impressed, then suspicious. Were you scared? Vanessa paused. The truthful answer surprised even her. No, she said quietly. Not really. Lily nodded like this answer meant something important. I want to drive fast someday. You are absolutely not helping, Caleb muttered. Vanessa smiled into her coffee cup while Lily ignored him completely. And sitting there in that tiny mountain diner with snow clouds, gathering outside, and a child asking impossible questions across the table, Vanessa realized something strange. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this relaxed. The waitress already knew Caleb and Lily by name. Vanessa noticed that almost immediately, not because it was unusual in a small-town diner, but because of the way it happened. No performance, no loud greetings, just quiet familiarity. Morning, Caleb. Morning, June. The usual? For me, yeah. June looked toward Lily. You still defending the breakfast burrito like it's a constitutional right? It's objectively the best thing here, Lily replied seriously. June nodded solemnly. Important research. Then she looked toward Vanessa with a knowing little smile. And for you? Vanessa realized she hadn't even opened the menu. The biscuits, Caleb said calmly from across the booth. Trust me, Lily pointed dramatically. He says that every week because he's emotionally attached to carbohydrates. That's enough from the tiny marine biologist. Vanessa laughed quietly again, and it happened to her for the second time that morning. That strange feeling of slipping into a moment that already existed before she arrived. Like Caleb and Lily had their own orbit, and somehow she'd been allowed inside it. Breakfast lasted almost 2 hours, not intentionally. Conversation simply kept moving naturally. Lily talked about whales with terrifying levels of detail for an 8-year-old. At one point she explained migration, patterns using crayons and syrup, packets while Caleb drank coffee beside her with the exhausted patience of a man who had heard this information many times before. Vanessa found herself genuinely listening, not pretending, actually interested. And orcas technically aren't whales, Lily explained seriously. They're dolphins. Vanessa blinked. I did not know that. Most people don't, Lily said with the quiet superiority of a child. Discovering adults are often underqualified. Caleb hid a smile behind his coffee mug. You created this, Vanessa told him. I'm aware. Lily suddenly looked at Vanessa again. So why'd you buy a Bugatti? The question landed more directly than expected. Vanessa stirred her coffee slowly. Most adults ask that question with hidden judgment underneath it. Lily asked because she genuinely wanted the answer. I liked it, Vanessa said finally. That's it? That's actually the real answer. Lily considered this carefully. They cost a lot. That's also true. So why not buy like 15 normal cars? Caleb closed his eyes briefly. Lily. No, it's smart, she defended. 15 cars is more transportation. Vanessa laughed softly. She's got a point. Lily nodded immediately. Exactly. Vanessa looked down into her coffee for a second before answering, more honestly than she expected to. I think, she began slowly, most of my life, I bought things because they made sense. Lily listened carefully now. The Bugatti was the first thing I ever bought just because I loved it. That quieted the table slightly. Even Caleb looked at her differently for a moment. Not analyzing, understanding. Lily tilted her head. So it makes you happy? Vanessa paused again, then realized something uncomfortable. It used to, she admitted quietly. Silence settled briefly. Not heavy, just thoughtful. Then Caleb spoke gently. You should drive it more. Vanessa looked at him. You already told me that. I meant it. Their eyes held for half a second longer than necessary. And suddenly, Vanessa became very aware of how warm the diner felt. Very aware of the coffee mug in her hands. Very aware that Caleb Hayes had a habit of saying simple things that somehow stayed in her head for days afterward. Thankfully, Lily interrupted before the silence became too noticeable. Dad rented a terrible car once. Caleb immediately groaned. We're not telling this story. It smelled like soup. It did not smell like soup. It absolutely smelled like soup. Vanessa smiled into her coffee again while Lily launched enthusiastically into the story anyway. Apparently, Caleb once rented an old compact sedan during a snowstorm in Utah that developed heater problems halfway through the drive. According to Lily, the interior smelled emotionally devastating. According to Caleb, it was slightly unpleasant. According to the waitress passing by with coffee refills. Oh yeah, that car definitely smelled like soup. Lily looked victorious. Vanessa laughed hard enough she actually covered her face briefly. And Caleb looked at her laughing with an expression she didn't fully know how to process. Not surprise exactly. Something softer, something quieter. Like he was noticing her becoming comfortable. And maybe liking it. By the time breakfast ended, snow had started falling lightly outside. Nothing heavy, just soft flakes drifting through the mountain air. Caleb insisted on paying. Vanessa argued once, then realized arguing with him was mostly useless when he'd already decided something. Outside the diner, cold air wrapped around them immediately. Lily zipped her jacket dramatically to her chin. Winter is trying to kill me. You say that every year, Caleb replied. Because it keeps trying. Vanessa smiled while pulling on her gloves. The Bugatti sat near the edge of the parking lot, looking almost unreal against the mountain backdrop. Low, black, aggressive. Several people walking past slowed down to stare at it. Lily noticed proudly. Your car causes emotional damage. That's generally the goal. Caleb shook his head once quietly. Then Lily suddenly grabbed his sleeve. Can we show her the lake next time? Caleb looked down. Maybe. No, definitely. He sighed softly. She inherited stubbornness from someone. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. Someone? She's adopted by wolves, apparently. Lily ignored him completely and turned back toward Vanessa. There's a frozen lake near our house, and Dad says not to walk on it because ice safety matters. But I think he's overly dramatic. Children falling through ice is generally considered inconvenient, Caleb replied. That's not scientifically precise. Vanessa laughed again. God! When was the last time she laughed this much in a single morning? The answer bothered her a little, because she honestly couldn't remember. Lily suddenly hugged Caleb around the waist without warning. The movement was so automatic neither of them even reacted to it consciously. But Vanessa noticed. Of course she noticed. Because there was something incredibly real about the two of them together. No performance. No polished family image. Just familiarity built through years of surviving life side by side. And unexpectedly, Vanessa felt something ache slightly inside her chest. Not jealousy. Not exactly. More like awareness. Awareness of something missing in her own life. She had money, success, recognition, properties in 3 cities, a company valued near $1 billion, and somehow a mechanic from Evergreen, standing in snowfall beside his daughter, looked more grounded than anyone she knew. Caleb looked toward her. You all right? She realized she'd drifted too deep into thought. Yeah, she answered quickly. But Caleb studied her for one extra second, like he knew there was more behind the answer. Then he simply nodded. No pressure, no digging. Another thing she was beginning to appreciate about him. He never forced conversations open. Vanessa looked toward her car reluctantly. I should head back. Work? Caleb asked. There's always work. A faint understanding crossed his face. Yeah, he said quietly. I remember. The sentence carried more weight than the words themselves, like he understood exactly what endless work could do to a person. Lily waved dramatically. Bye, Bugatti lady. Vanessa smiled. Bye, tiny whale scientist. That earned an immediate grin. Then Vanessa climbed into the Bugatti and started the engine. The sound echoed through the snowy parking lot. She glanced once through the windshield before pulling away. Caleb stood beside the diner. with one hand resting lightly on Lily's shoulder while snow collected across his dark jacket. And for reasons she still couldn't fully explain, leaving suddenly felt harder than it should have. The next few Saturdays became routine so quietly that Vanessa didn't notice when they stopped feeling unusual. Then one morning she realized she was scheduling the rest of her week around breakfast in Evergreen. That realization should have concerned her more than it did. Instead, it stayed with her all day like something warm tucked into the corner of her thoughts. Work remained relentless. Sterling Prestige Motors was expanding faster than expected, which sounded impressive in interviews and absolutely exhausting in reality. There were vendor negotiations in Chicago, a luxury EV partnership in California, 3 investor meetings in 4 days. Vanessa handled all of it the way she handled everything else. Efficiently, calmly, professionally. But lately, something had changed. Small things, tiny things, like noticing silence in her penthouse after coming home late, or catching herself checking the weather in Evergreen during meetings, or realizing she had started leaving Saturday mornings completely empty on her calendar without consciously deciding to. And worst of all, people around her had started noticing. You're smiling more. Vanessa looked up from her laptop immediately. Marcus stood in the doorway, holding a stack of reports. I'm sorry? You heard me. She narrowed her eyes. I literally pay you to mind your business. You also pay me to notice things. He walked into the office and dropped the reports onto her desk. You used to look like you were preparing for war during quarterly meetings. I am preparing for war during quarterly meetings. Yeah, but now occasionally you look less homicidal. Vanessa stared at him flatly. Marcus leaned against the chair across from her desk. It's the mechanic, isn't it? She almost choked on her coffee. What? The Evergreen guy. I have no idea what you're talking about. Marcus nodded slowly. Interesting. Because Danny says you've driven to Evergreen 5 Saturdays in a row. Traitor. Vanessa set her coffee down carefully. Danny needs hobbies. Marcus grinned openly now. Oh my God. There is no oh my God. You like him. Vanessa rubbed one hand across her forehead slowly. I am not discussing this with you. Marcus looked genuinely delighted. This is incredible. What exactly is incredible? You're dating a mountain mechanic. We are not dating. You had breakfast with his daughter. That doesn't mean anything. Marcus pointed toward her. That sentence alone means everything. Vanessa threw a pen at him. He dodged it easily, still laughing. You're impossible, she muttered. No, seriously, he said, calming slightly. You seem happier lately. That quieted her, because Marcus wasn't joking anymore. And Vanessa suddenly realized she didn't know how to answer. Happier? Was she? The uncomfortable part was, maybe, not dramatically, not magically, but there was something undeniably different about the last few weeks. Something lighter. Marcus studied her expression carefully now. Then his voice softened slightly. You've spent 10 years building a life that runs entirely on pressure, he said quietly. Maybe it's not the worst thing in the world that something finally interrupted it. Vanessa looked away toward the windows. Downtown Denver stretched below in steel and glass beneath pale afternoon light. Busy, fast, constant. Her whole life had started feeling like that city, always moving, never resting. And somehow breakfast in a tiny diner 2 hours away had become the one part of her week that felt still. That Saturday, snow covered Evergreen in soft white layers. The roads were quieter than usual, the mountains hidden behind gray fog. Vanessa arrived 5 minutes early and immediately hated herself for caring. The diner windows glowed warmly through the snowfall, and inside Caleb was already there. Of course he was. He looked up when she entered, and there it was again. That small expression he got when he saw her. Subtle. Real. Enough to make something shift low in her chest. Morning, he said. Morning. Lily waved enthusiastically from the booth. Dad said rich people are usually late. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. I absolutely did not say that. You implied it emotionally. Vanessa laughed while sliding into the booth. I'm glad your daughter interprets human behavior like a tiny lawyer. She's exhausting. I heard that. You were supposed to. June brought coffee without asking now. Another thing Vanessa had quietly started loving. Nobody here treated her like Vanessa Sterling, the CEO. She was just Vanessa. And after years of constantly being watched, measured, and evaluated, that simplicity felt dangerously comforting. Lily immediately launched into a detailed explanation about deep-sea jellyfish. Vanessa listened while Caleb poured coffee across from her. At one point, their hands brushed briefly near the cream container. Tiny contact, barely anything. Still, both of them noticed. Vanessa looked down into her cup immediately afterward, which was ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. She was 30 years old, not 16. But something about Caleb made her strangely aware of small things. The steadiness in his voice, the roughness in his hands, the way he listened completely when someone spoke. Most people listened while waiting for their turn to talk. Caleb actually listened, and that had become unexpectedly rare in her world. Lily eventually disappeared toward the counter to inspect pie options with June, leaving Vanessa and Caleb alone for the first time in weeks. The silence between them felt different immediately. Not uncomfortable, just quieter, more aware. Caleb leaned back slightly in the booth. "You look tired." Vanessa exhaled softly. "Long week." "You say that every week." "That's because every week is long." He studied her for a second. "When's the last time you took a day off?" She almost answered automatically, then stopped. Because honestly, she couldn't remember. "That bad?" he asked gently. Vanessa stared down at her coffee. "My company got big very fast," she admitted quietly. "And somewhere along the way, I stopped knowing how to slow down without feeling guilty." Caleb nodded once, like he understood exactly what she meant. "I used to do that," he said. "With work? With proving myself." She looked up slightly. He rested his forearms lightly against the table. "When I first started engineering, everybody around me was older, smarter, more experienced." His voice remained calm and steady. "So I worked constantly because I thought, if I slowed down for even a second, somebody would realize I didn't belong there." Vanessa understood that feeling instantly. Painfully instantly. "And did they?" she asked softly. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "No." The diner noise faded strangely around them for a moment. Snow drifted outside the windows, while warm light reflected softly across the booth, and Vanessa became suddenly aware of how close this conversation felt. Not flirtation exactly. Something deeper than that. Trust, maybe. The beginning of it. Then Caleb said quietly, "You don't always have to earn rest." The sentence hit her harder than it should have, because nobody had ever said something like that to her before. Not sincerely. People admired her ambition, respected it, envied it, but nobody ever questioned the cost of it, except the mechanic from Evergreen. Lily suddenly returned holding 2 slices of pie triumphantly above her head. Emergency dessert situation. The moment broke instantly, but not completely, because even while Lily argued passionately about pie distribution, Vanessa could still feel Caleb's words sitting quietly in her chest. The first time Vanessa visited Caleb's shop wasn't planned. At least that's what she told herself. Officially, she was there to check on the replacement terminal assembly for the Bugatti. Unofficially, she'd spent 3 straight days thinking about him, which was becoming a problem. Hayes Auto sat just outside Evergreen near a narrow 2-lane road lined with pine trees and old snowbanks, turning gray at the edges. The building itself was small. 2 service bays, faded signage, soda machine near the entrance that probably hadn't changed since 2009. Nothing about it looked impressive, and somehow that made Vanessa trust it immediately. She parked the Range Rover instead of the Bugatti this time, mostly because driving a $4 million hypercar through slush-covered mountain roads felt irresponsible, but also because she didn't want to arrive looking like Vanessa Sterling, the CEO. She just wanted to see him. That realization hit her halfway through the drive and irritated her for the remaining 30 minutes. The bell above the shop door rang softly when she entered. Warm air carrying motor oil and coffee drifted toward her immediately. Country music played quietly somewhere near the back, and Caleb stood beneath the hood of an old silver Toyota pickup with grease across one forearm and safety glasses pushed into his dark hair. For half a second he didn't notice her. Vanessa found herself simply watching him. The calm concentration, the steady hands, the complete focus. Then he looked up, and there it was again. That small shift in his expression when he saw her. Subtle, but real. "Hey," he said. "Hey." God. She was starting to like hearing him say that. "You're far from Denver. I had business nearby." Caleb raised one eyebrow slightly. "You absolutely did not." Vanessa almost smiled. "You seem confident. You drove 90 minutes to a repair shop without calling first." "Fair." A teenage boy appeared from underneath the truck holding a wrench. Maybe 16, dark curly hair. Grease stains everywhere. He looked between them immediately with open curiosity. "Who's this?" Caleb slid the safety glasses down from his head. Mateo, this is Vanessa. Mateo blinked once, then twice. Wait, he said slowly. The Bugatti person? Vanessa groaned quietly. I hate that this is apparently my identity now. Mateo looked genuinely impressed. You own a Chiron? Unfortunately. That's sick. Language, Caleb said automatically. Sorry, that's incredibly respectable. Vanessa laughed softly. Mateo pointed toward Caleb immediately. He talked about your grounding issue for like 2 straight days. Caleb sighed. That's enough. No, seriously, Mateo continued. He got super annoyed because apparently rich engineers ignored obvious electrical behavior. Vanessa folded her arms carefully. That sounds accurate, actually. Caleb gave Mateo a look. Mateo wisely disappeared back under the truck, still grinning. Vanessa watched Caleb wipe his hands with a rag. So this is the famous shop. He glanced around casually. Pretty glamorous. And weirdly, she thought it was. Not because of the building. Because of the atmosphere. Everything here felt honest. Real problems. Real work. Real people. No polished image. No corporate performance. Just purpose. Vanessa leaned lightly against the tool cabinet nearby. How long have you had this place? 6 years. You built it yourself? Mostly. Again, simple answers. No bragging. No dramatic speeches about hard work. Just facts. She looked around the garage more carefully now. Old photographs hung near the office doorway. One showed a much younger Caleb standing beside a race car team somewhere overseas. Another showed toddler-aged Lily asleep on his chest while he sat in a folding chair holding a bottle in one hand. Vanessa stared at that photo slightly longer than intended. Caleb noticed. She hated sleeping alone, he said quietly. Vanessa looked back toward him. How old was she there? Maybe 3. His expression softened almost invisibly. She used to fall asleep in the office while I worked late. Something about the image hurt unexpectedly. Not because it was sad, because it was intimate. The kind of memory people usually protected carefully. You really gave all of it up, Vanessa said softly. The engineering career. Caleb shrugged once while setting tools onto the workbench. Depends how you define gave up. You know what I mean. He leaned back lightly against the counter. I liked the work, he admitted. A lot. His eyes drifted briefly toward the open garage door, where snow melt dripped from the roof edges outside. But after Elena died, he stopped there for a second, not avoiding the sentence, just moving through it carefully. I kept realizing Lily was growing up around schedules built for machines instead of people. Vanessa stayed quiet. Because some answers deserved space, Caleb continued calmly. I'd leave before sunrise, get home exhausted, spend half my life in airports. He shook his head slightly. One day I picked Lily up from daycare and she called the nanny. Mom by accident. The garage suddenly felt very still. She cried afterward because she thought she hurt my feelings, he said quietly. And I remember sitting in the parking lot realizing I didn't even know what my own life was anymore. Vanessa looked down briefly. Something tight pulled across her chest, because she understood that feeling more than she wanted to, not the parent part. The other part, waking up one day and realizing success had quietly consumed everything else around it. Caleb looked toward her gently. You okay? She nodded automatically. Too quickly, he noticed. Of course he noticed. You ever think about slowing down? He asked softly. Vanessa let out a quiet breath. All the time. Then why don't you? The question landed directly. Painfully directly. Because she honestly didn't know. Or maybe she did. Fear. Fear that stopping meant losing momentum. Fear that slowing down meant becoming irrelevant. Fear that if she wasn't constantly moving, she'd have to confront how lonely her life had quietly become. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she looked around the garage. At least your problems make sense, she said quietly. Broken things. Parts. Systems. Caleb watched her carefully. People are systems too. That sentence stayed suspended between them, heavy in a strange, quiet way. Then the office door suddenly burst open, and Lily stormed inside wearing a giant winter coat and carrying what appeared to be an aggressively melting smoothie. Dad, the lid betrayed me. Caleb blinked once at the purple liquid covering her glove. That does appear catastrophic. Lily finally noticed Vanessa and immediately brightened. Bugatti lady. Vanessa laughed despite herself. Hi, tiny whale scientist. Lily marched over dramatically. Dad says octopuses can open jars now. That's true, Caleb said. That's horrifying. It should concern you less than the smoothie situation. Lily ignored him, then looked between both adults with terrifying child-level perception. Were you having serious feelings conversation? Vanessa almost inhaled coffee wrong. Caleb closed his eyes slowly. Where do you even learn these phrases? Internet. That explains literally everything. Lily nodded wisely, then pointed at Vanessa. You should stay for dinner. The garage became suddenly quiet. Vanessa blinked. Oh, we're having tacos, Lily added helpfully. Very persuasive tacos, Caleb muttered. Vanessa looked toward him instinctively. He looked slightly embarrassed now, which was somehow the most attractive thing she'd seen all week. You don't have to, he said quietly. And the dangerous part was, she wanted to. Vanessa stayed for dinner, which honestly should have alarmed her more than it did, because somewhere between breakfast, Saturdays, and unexpected garage conversations, spending time with Caleb Hayes had stopped feeling unusual and started feeling easy. That was the dangerous part. Lily took taco night extremely seriously. Vanessa discovered this within approximately 4 minutes of entering Caleb's house. The place sat on the edge of evergreen, tucked between tall pine trees with snow still gathered beneath the branches. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows into the fading evening while smoke drifted lightly from a chimney into the cold Colorado air. It wasn't large, but it felt lived in, comfortable, real. The exact opposite of Vanessa's downtown penthouse, with its floor-to-ceiling, glass and expensive silence. The moment she stepped inside, Lily pointed toward the kitchen dramatically. You're chopping vegetables. Vanessa blinked. I am? Dad says people should contribute to civilization. That's not remotely what I said, Caleb replied while hanging up his jacket. It was emotionally the message. Vanessa laughed softly while pulling off her gloves. God, she did that constantly around them now. The realization hit her quietly while she followed Lily into the kitchen. Music played low somewhere in the background. Something acoustic and warm. The counters held bowls of chopped vegetables, shredded cheese, hot sauce bottles, and a skillet already heating on the stove. Caleb moved around the kitchen with easy familiarity while Lily narrated everything happening like a tiny documentary host. Dad burns tortillas when he's distracted. I burned them once. It was smoke adjacent. Vanessa smiled while taking the knife Lily handed her. You run a very judgmental household. We value accuracy, Lily replied seriously. Caleb looked over at Vanessa then, and for half a second something softened in his expression again. That same quiet look he got lately whenever she laughed, like he was noticing it each time, like it mattered to him. Vanessa suddenly became very aware of how domestic this scene looked, which was ridiculous. She stood in a warm kitchen, chopping bell peppers beside a mechanic while his daughter argued with sour cream containers. And somehow, it felt more peaceful than most luxury vacations she'd taken in the last 5 years. That realization unsettled her more than she expected. Dinner happened around a scarred wooden table near the windows. Snow drifted softly outside while warm light filled the room. Lily talked almost continuously about whales, about school, about why octopuses were probably planning something, about a classmate named Trevor who apparently lacked critical thinking skills. Vanessa found herself listening instead of checking her phone. Actually listening. At one point, Caleb noticed her phone buzzing repeatedly near her elbow. You can answer it, he said quietly. Vanessa glanced down at the screen. 3 missed calls, 2 emails marked urgent, 1 investor requesting immediate revisions. Normally that kind of thing would have pulled her attention instantly. Instead, she flipped the phone over. It can wait. Caleb studied her carefully for a second, then nodded once. No praise, no comment, just understanding. And weirdly, that felt better. Lily pointed toward Vanessa suddenly. You smile different here. The sentence caught both adults off guard. What? Vanessa asked. Lily shrugged while eating tortilla chips. At the diner, your work face disappears after like 15 minutes. Caleb nearly choked on his drink. Work face? She has one, Lily insisted. At first, she looks like she's negotiating with international spies. Vanessa stared across the table in disbelief. I cannot believe I'm being psychoanalyzed by a 4th grader. 3rd grader, Lily corrected. Even worse, Caleb rubbed one hand against his forehead, trying not to laugh. But Vanessa noticed the way he looked at her afterward. Thoughtful, quietly observant. Like Lily's comment had confirmed something he already suspected. And honestly, maybe it had, because lately Vanessa had started noticing it too. The version of herself that existed here felt different, less guarded, less sharp around the edges, like she could exhale fully for the first time in years. That should have scared her. Instead, it made her want to stay longer. After dinner, Lily disappeared upstairs to finish homework while Caleb washed dishes. Vanessa tried helping once. Caleb handed her a towel. Apparently that meant she was officially participating now. The kitchen settled into comfortable quiet, water running softly, snow tapping lightly against the windows. Vanessa dried plates beside him while he washed them with steady, practiced movements, and suddenly the silence between them felt much more noticeable without Lily filling every space. Not awkward, just aware. Caleb finally spoke first. "She likes you." Vanessa looked down at the plate in her hands. "I like her too. She doesn't warm up to people quickly." That surprised her slightly. "Really?" "She's friendly," he said. "Not the same thing." Vanessa leaned lightly against the counter. "And yet apparently I passed inspection." A faint smile touched his mouth. "Apparently." Another quiet pause settled. Then Caleb looked toward her more seriously. "You've become important to her faster than I expected." The sentence landed carefully between them. Not pressure, not accusation, just honesty. Vanessa's chest tightened slightly, because suddenly she understood what he was actually saying underneath the words. Be careful, not because he didn't trust her, because Lily mattered, and Caleb had spent 6 years building a stable life around protecting that little girl from disappointment. Vanessa swallowed softly. "I'm not trying to complicate things," she said quietly. "I know," he answered immediately. Too immediately, like he genuinely believed her. And somehow that trust felt heavier than suspicion would have. Caleb shut off the water and dried his hands slowly. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller somehow. "Closer. You know what the problem is?" Vanessa asked softly before she could stop herself. He looked at her. "I'm starting to feel comfortable here." Caleb held her gaze for a long second, and when he answered, his voice came quieter than before. "Yeah," he said. "I noticed. Something shifted in the room then. Subtle, but undeniable. Not friendship anymore. Not fully. The air between them felt too warm now, too aware." Vanessa looked down first, which almost never happened to her. But Caleb had a way of looking at her directly that made pretense feel impossible. Upstairs, Lily dropped something loudly followed by a dramatic, "That wasn't important." Neither adult moved immediately. The moment stretched another second longer. Then Caleb exhaled softly through his nose. "She's definitely mine." Vanessa laughed quietly, grateful for the interruption. But the feeling remained, that dangerous closeness, that growing awareness neither of them seemed ready to name out loud yet. A few minutes later, Vanessa finally grabbed her coat near the front door. Caleb walked her outside. Cold night air wrapped around them immediately, while snow covered the driveway in silver beneath the porch light. Her Range Rover sat near the trees, dusted lightly in fresh snow. Neither of them spoke at first. Vanessa looked toward the mountains disappearing into darkness beyond the road, then finally said quietly, "I should go." Probably. But neither of them moved. Caleb stood beside her with his hands in his jacket, pockets while cold air drifted between them in white clouds. And Vanessa suddenly realized something terrifying. She didn't want to leave. Not yet. Not this place. Not him. Caleb looked at her carefully, like he knew exactly what she was thinking. Then softly, "Drive safe, Vanessa." The way he said her name almost undid her a little. She nodded once, opened the driver's side door, then paused, turned back toward him, and before logic could intervene, she stepped closer and kissed his cheek lightly. Barely 2 seconds. Warm skin against cold air, then immediately stepped back. Both of them looked slightly stunned. Vanessa's heartbeat slammed painfully against her ribs. "Well," she said breathlessly, "that happened." Caleb stared at her for one long, quiet second. Then slowly, very slowly, the corner of his mouth lifted. That small, rare smile again. Only this time it wasn't subtle, it was real, and somehow that made it worse. Vanessa spent the entire drive back to Denver replaying the kiss in her head, which was deeply annoying, because technically, it barely counted as a kiss. 2 seconds, maybe less. A quick impulsive moment in freezing air outside a mountain house, and yet somehow her entire nervous system had reacted like she'd made a life-altering decision. The worst part? Caleb hadn't stopped her. That thought followed her all the way down the mountain roads. By the time she reached her penthouse, Denver glittered beneath the night sky in cold white lights. Usually the city energized her. Tonight it just felt loud, empty in a polished, expensive kind of way. Vanessa dropped her keys onto the kitchen counter and stood silently in the middle of the apartment while floor to ceiling. Windows reflected her back at herself, still wearing his warmth on her skin, still hearing the way he said her name afterward. "Drive safe, Vanessa." Simple words. But Caleb somehow made simple things dangerous. Her phone buzzed again. Another investor email? Another scheduling issue. Another problem requiring immediate attention. Vanessa stared at the screen for 3 full seconds, then turned the phone face down without reading it. That alone should have terrified her. Instead, she walked toward the windows and looked out over the city, while snow drifted lightly between skyscrapers. And for the first time in years, work wasn't the loudest thing in her head. Meanwhile, in Evergreen, Caleb Hayes stood outside his house for another full minute after Vanessa left. Snow gathered slowly across his shoulders while her taillights disappeared down the dark mountain road. He still hadn't moved. Inside the house, Lily appeared suddenly behind the living room curtains like a tiny detective. Then the front door opened. "You like her," Caleb finally exhaled. "That's a very invasive entrance." Lily crossed her arms dramatically. "You stood outside staring into space for emotional reasons." "I was thinking." "You were feelings thinking." Caleb walked back inside slowly and shut the door behind him. Warm air hit immediately. "I'm begging you to stop inventing phrases. I didn't invent feelings thinking. It's a real thing." Caleb hung up his jacket carefully. Lily narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "Did she kiss you?" He looked at her flatly. "What kind of question is that?" "That's a yes. Go brush your teeth." Lily gasped dramatically. "Oh my God." "Lily, you're doing romance." "I am absolutely not doing romance." "You looked at the door like people do in movies." Caleb rubbed one hand across his face slowly. This was karma for every time he laughed at parents dealing with curious children. "She's nice," Lily said more quietly now. Caleb glanced toward her. "Yeah," he admitted softly, "she is." And there it was. The truth he'd been carefully avoiding for weeks. Because the problem wasn't attraction. That part had happened almost immediately. The problem was that Vanessa Sterling had somehow started mattering. Slowly, quietly, in all the dangerous ways that snuck up on people when they stopped paying attention. Caleb understood risk. He'd spent years rebuilding stability after losing Elena. Years creating a life simple enough that nothing could suddenly destroy it again. And Vanessa felt complicated. Not intentionally, but inevitably. She belonged to a world of investors, deadlines, luxury brands, and nonstop pressure. A world Caleb had walked away from deliberately. And yet every Saturday morning, every conversation, every quiet look across diner tables pulled him closer anyway. Lily pointed toward him knowingly. "You're doing the face again." "What face?" "The staring into your soul face." "That's not a thing." "It absolutely is." Caleb laughed quietly despite himself, then looked toward the snowy darkness outside the windows for one brief moment, and realized something unsettling. He couldn't remember the last time he'd looked forward to seeing someone this much. Monday morning arrived brutally fast. Vanessa barely slept. Not because of stress, which honestly felt more disruptive than stress itself. She arrived at Sterling headquarters before sunrise, carrying coffee and 3 hours of sleep hidden beneath expensive clothing and sheer force of will. Marcus noticed immediately. "You look emotionally compromised." Vanessa walked straight past him. "Good morning to you too." He followed her into the office. "You didn't deny it." "There's nothing to deny." Marcus sat casually across from her desk. "You drove to Evergreen again, didn't you?" She opened her laptop aggressively. "I failed to understand why my personal life concerns you, because for the first time in 6 years, you have one." Vanessa pointed toward the door. "Leave." Marcus ignored her completely. "You like him a lot." Silence. Then, "That's not helpful." Marcus blinked once. "Oh, wow." Vanessa leaned back slowly in her chair, and suddenly the exhaustion hit harder than expected. Not physical exhaustion. Emotional. Because feelings were inconvenient. Messy, unpredictable. She'd spent most of her adult life building control, structure, momentum, and Caleb disrupted all of it just by existing calmly near her. Marcus watched her carefully now. "You're scared." That irritated her instantly. "I am not scared." "Yes, you are." She folded her arms tightly. "Of what exactly?" Marcus shrugged lightly. "Probably the same thing everyone's scared of when they finally meet someone real." The room quieted. Vanessa looked away toward the windows again. Clouds hung low across Denver while morning traffic crawled slowly through downtown streets below. "Do you know what the worst part is?" she asked softly. Marcus stayed quiet. "He doesn't want anything from me." That made Marcus pause, because he understood immediately. Most people approached Vanessa Sterling with motives attached. Business access, connections, status, opportunity. But Caleb never treated her like leverage. Never seemed impressed by her money.
Never adjusted himself around her success. He just saw her and that terrified her more than manipulation ever could. Marcus leaned back slowly. That's usually what healthy looks like. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. Healthy.
God.
What an unfamiliar word. Her phone buzzed again. This time she glanced at the screen automatically. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, then answered distractedly, "This is Vanessa." "Miss Sterling?" a nervous male voice asked. "This is Eric from the Los Angeles Service Center." Immediately her attention sharpened. "The replacement terminal arrived?" "Yes, ma'am. But there's another issue." Something cold moved quietly through her stomach. "What kind of issue?" A hesitation. Then, "The assembly we received doesn't match your chassis configuration." Vanessa sat upright instantly. "What?" "We checked the serial coding twice. The part number Caleb Hayes gave you appears connected to a prototype revision." The office went silent. Marcus looked up immediately from across the desk. Vanessa tightened her grip on the phone. "That's impossible." "That's what we thought," Eric admitted carefully. "But according to internal records, your vehicle shouldn't even have that configuration installed." Vanessa's heartbeat slowed painfully. Outside the office windows, snow began drifting softly across downtown Denver. And suddenly, something felt very wrong.
Vanessa ended the call slowly, too slowly, like her brain needed extra time to process what she'd just heard. Marcus leaned forward immediately. "What happened?" She stared at the phone in her hand for one long second before answering. "The replacement terminal doesn't match the car." Marcus frowned. "What does that mean?" Vanessa stood and walked toward the windows automatically, her thoughts moving too fast now. The Los Angeles Center checked the serial coding. According to their records, Caleb's part number belongs to a prototype revision. Marcus blinked. "I thought Caleb said the configuration was undocumented." He did. Snow drifted outside across downtown Denver in soft white streaks while silence settled heavily through the office. Then Marcus asked carefully, "You think he lied?" Vanessa didn't answer immediately, because honestly, she didn't know what to think, and that bothered her more than anything else. An hour later, she called Caleb. He answered on the second ring. "Hey." Normally, hearing his voice calmed something in her. Today, it tightened everything instead. "The replacement part doesn't exist in public records." A short silence followed. Then Caleb answered carefully. "Yeah." Vanessa's stomach dropped slightly. "You knew?" "I suspected." She turned away from the windows sharply. "Caleb," his voice stayed calm. "Vanessa, it's complicated." "No," she said quietly. "Actually, it's becoming very uncomplicated." Another silence. Then, "You deserve an explanation." "Yes, I do." Caleb exhaled softly on the other end of the line. "Can you come to Evergreen?" Vanessa almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because this suddenly felt insane. "I have meetings all afternoon. This shouldn't happen over the phone." Something in his voice stopped her. Not guilt, not panic, something heavier. And against her better judgment, Vanessa found herself grabbing her coat 20 minutes later. The drive to Evergreen felt completely different this time. The mountains looked colder somehow, the roads quieter. Questions circled endlessly in her head while snow blurred across the windshield. What exactly had Caleb worked on? Why would Bugatti deny the configuration existed? And most importantly, what else hadn't he told her? By the time she reached Hayes Auto, daylight had already started fading behind thick gray clouds. The shop looked closed. No customers, no music, just Caleb standing, alone outside beneath the garage, overhang with his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, waiting. Vanessa parked hard enough to spray slush across the curb, then stepped out immediately. Cold wind hit her face. "You knew," she said before reaching him fully. Caleb nodded once. "I knew the records wouldn't match." "That's not a normal sentence." "No," he admitted quietly. "It's not." Vanessa folded her arms tightly against the cold. "Start talking." For a second, he just looked at her, like he was trying to decide where to begin. Then finally, "The grounding system in your car was never supposed to be installed." Silence. "What?" Caleb glanced toward the dark shop windows briefly before continuing. 3 years ago, Bugatti tested a revised electrical architecture for extreme climate reliability. Vanessa listened carefully now. It was experimental. Only a handful of vehicles received it during limited production testing. "The prototype revision," she said quietly. Caleb nodded. "But after testing, the company abandoned the design." "Why?" His jaw tightened slightly. "Because 2 prototype vehicles experienced catastrophic electrical failures during high-speed stress testing. Vanessa felt cold spread slowly through her chest. What kind of failures? Caleb looked directly at her. Complete electrical shutdown. The wind moved softly through the trees around them. Neither spoke for a second. Then Vanessa said carefully, "My car could have lost power while driving." In theory. In theory? The issue only occurred under extreme thermal load conditions. That's not comforting. I know. His voice stayed low and steady. Too steady. Like he'd spent years carrying this conversation around in his head already. Vanessa searched his face carefully now. "You worked on this system personally?" "Yes. And nobody told me. The dealership didn't know. But you did." Another silence. Then, "Yes." That hurt more than she expected. Not because of the car, because trust had quietly become involved somewhere along the way. And now she suddenly didn't know where the edges of truth actually were anymore. Vanessa stepped back slightly. "How dangerous is the car?" Caleb answered immediately. "I wouldn't let you drive something unsafe." The certainty in his voice should have reassured her. Instead, it complicated everything further. Because she believed him. Even now, even angry, she still believed him. And that made this harder. Caleb watched her carefully. "The prototype failures happened during closed-track thermal abuse testing," he explained calmly. "Conditions your car will never realistically experience." "You should have told me." "Yes." The honesty caught her off guard. No excuses. No defensive speech. Just yes. Snow crunched softly beneath Vanessa's boots as she looked away toward the trees. "What else don't I know?" That question finally changed something in Caleb's expression. A flicker of tension. Real tension. "I signed NDAs connected to the program." Vanessa stared at him. "You're serious?" "Very." "And you're telling me this anyway?" "You deserved the truth." The sentence landed heavily between them because she knew what it cost. Him to say that. Vanessa looked down briefly, then quietly. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Caleb's eyes stayed on her. "Because the moment I did..." He stopped there, but she understood anyway. Everything would change. And standing there in freezing Colorado air, Vanessa realized something painful. He'd been right. Because suddenly the easy warmth between them felt fragile. Complicated. Threatened by secrets neither of them fully knew how to carry now. The garage door rattled loudly behind them. Both turned instinctively. Mateo stepped halfway outside holding a wrench, then immediately froze. "Oh," he said carefully. "This feels emotionally dangerous." "Go inside," Caleb replied without looking away from Vanessa. Mateo vanished instantly. Vanessa almost laughed despite herself. Almost. Caleb stepped closer slowly. Not enough to touch her, just enough that his voice dropped lower. "I should have told you sooner." Snow drifted between them softly. "And I'm sorry for that." Vanessa searched his face carefully, looking for manipulation, looking for calculation, looking for anything false. But Caleb only looked tired, honest, and strangely afraid of losing something. Losing her. That realization weakened her anger in ways she didn't want. "You don't get to do that," she said quietly. "Do what?" "Look at me like this while I'm trying to be mad at you." For the first time all evening, a tiny surprised smile touched the corner of his mouth. Small, real, dangerous, and somehow that made everything worse again. But standing there beneath the falling Colorado snow, Vanessa Sterling realized something dangerous. She was no longer afraid of Caleb Hayes' secrets. She was afraid of how much he was starting to matter to her. And neither of them understood yet that the past Caleb tried so hard to bury was already beginning to follow them back into the light. Because some mistakes never stay hidden forever, especially the deadly ones.